Welcome, everybody. We are excited you could join us today for Indigenous Voices on Our Changing Earth. My name is Alex Elliott, and I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, which, if you do not know, is a nonprofit university located in San Francisco. As many of us are descendants of settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those who were forcefully brought to this continent, we, CIIS Public Programs, must recognize and never forget that our university's building in San Francisco occupies traditional, unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. If you're interested in learning more about Native lands, languages, and territories, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Before we jump into the conversation tonight, I have just a couple of general tips and troubleshooting items to go over. We are going to be having a live Q&A after the conversation tonight for anyone who is joining us live. So please submit your questions at any time using our web form, which is linked in the event description just below this video. Our presenters are going to be pulling questions that were submitted on that form after their talk, and then we'll try to get through as many as we have time for. We do have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button right in YouTube. If you are having any issues with your audio or video, we always suggest that you first try reloading the page, and then if you're still having issues, it may help to adjust your video settings within YouTube. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Melissa and Dahr, and then we'll get right to their conversation. Dahr Jamail is the author of The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption, a finalist for the Penn E.O. Wilson Science Writing Award. Dahr has also won numerous other awards, including the Martha Gellhorn Award for Investigative Journalism and the Izzy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Independent Media. More recently, with Stan Rushworth, Dahr co-authored We Are the Middle of Forever, Indigenous Voices Speak on the Changing Earth. Melissa K. Nelson is a mixed-race Native American ecologist and activist scholar. She earned her PhD in ecology with an emphasis in Native American studies at the University of California, Davis. Formerly a professor of American Indian Studies at San Francisco State University, she now serves as professor of Indigenous Sustainability at Arizona State University in the School of Sustainability. From 1993 to 2021, Melissa served as the founding executive director and CEO of the Cultural Conservancy and continues to serve as president of their board. She is the co-editor of and contributor to Traditional Ecological Knowledge, Learning from Indigenous Practices for Environmental Sustainability, and What Kind of Ancestor Do You Want to Be? She is also the editor of and a contributor to Original Instructions, Indigenous Teachings for a Sustainable Future. Melissa is Anishinaabe Métis Norwegian and an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Melissa and Dahr.
Thank you so much.
Well, Melissa, it is very great to be with you here. Last time we saw each other was with Stan doing your interview for the book. So really great to be here. And thank you very much for being able to be part of this event tonight.
Thank you, Dahr.
Yeah, so where should we start? I feel like I've looked over some of the things that we discussed and some of the parts of the book that we might talk about, but where do you think we should begin?
I think we should start at the beginning, Dahr. I mean, this book that you and Stan put together and the inspiration for it and the writing process, I love that it's based on really the oral tradition. I think most of it you did is in-person interviews with all the contributors, and it would be great to hear from you, just a little bit about the origin story of this project and how you put it all together. I think it's a remarkable collection. For those who haven't seen it, we are in the middle of forever. And it's really a powerful text. I was rereading it in preparation for our time together. Indigenous Voices from Turtle Island on the Changing Earth. And I love your writing, and you and Stan did a beautiful job curating these voices. So let's hear a little bit from you about that origin story.
Yeah, well, thank you, Melissa. And well, what happened was I was on tour for the End of Ice, the climate book, and I had met Stan a little bit before that book was published, and we became good friends, very good friends when we met. And he came to a couple of my different presentations for the climate book, and together we were witnessing this just abject despair that so many people were feeling about the climate crisis, or, insert name of crisis here. There's so much going on, so much despair, but keeping it specifically to the climate issue, people just did not know how to be with it. And we were seeing in the audience that people were angry, they were despairing, and at one point, some people were making comments like, well, if humans don't survive this, the earth will be better off without us, and comments like this. And Stan particularly was quite upset hearing this, and we kept talking more and more about it. And he said, look, this is not a new thing for Indigenous people. Indigenous people have survived genocide, have continued to survive the ongoing erasure, all these different things, and we're still here. And what if we thought about some kind of a book where we could just gather together, almost like a talking circle, just a group of, say, 20 people, and just some reservation, non-reservation, academic, non-academic, just get a big broad cross-section of society, best we could anyway, with a limited number of people, and just ask them a few general questions, which were basically, what do you see happening on the earth today? How did we get here? And where might we go from here, / how might we comport ourselves? And so that's really where the idea of the book came from. And another one, Kyle White, one of the interviewees in the book, talks about this in a little bit different way. But another thing that came up was, if you take, for example, the Apache folks from northern Mexico and Arizona and that region, put them on a train, ship them across the country, and drop them in Florida and say, here you are, this is where you're going to be. That is abrupt climate disruption. And so they survived, and they're still here. And we can look at, large numbers of instances of this same thing, these just shocking dislocations of Indigenous people around the country, just the movement, not even talking about the genocide, and they're still here. So these folks clearly have insight that would be very, very helpful to all of us right now. So that's really the origin story of the book. So to close that out, the plan was to go to each person and interview them together. The 3 interviews of the book happened, and then the pandemic happened. So then the rest of them, like yours, were done on Zoom.
Wow, what an incredible story, and such a reinforcement, really, of even your thesis, in the sense of, wow, the earth is changing dramatically. And let's talk to people who have actually gone through those experiences before. And then a global pandemic happens. And, Indigenous peoples have suffered through different forms of epidemics, throughout history since colonial times. And so it was just kind of almost ironic that the the pandemic hit right as you were beginning this book about the changing earth and the changing times and the threats to humanity. It just reinforced the whole purpose of it, it seems.
And you know, I think if we're, again, starting at the beginning of things, knowing that you had the honor and the privilege to get to study under Jack Forbes. And one of the seminal books for me in recent years, because I first read it probably about 5 years ago, was Columbus and Other Cannibals. And you got to be at UC Davis studying with him and introducing the idea of Wetiko disease or cannibalism disease, and looking, just talking about, okay, so how did we get here? I thought it'd be really great if you felt like talking about that to kind of lead this conversation.
I would be honored to, Dahr. Thank you. Yes, I was very fortunate. One of the reasons I did my graduate work up at University of California, Davis, was because of Jack D. Forbes, Lenni Lenape scholar, author, historian, really one of the founders of the Native American Studies movement in academia, and certainly the Native American Studies department at UC Davis. And I had just read his book, Columbus and Other Cannibals, in, quote, honor of the quincentennial of 500 years in 1992 since Columbus's fateful encounter, first with the Taino in the Caribbean and Florida, and then coming up into what we call Turtle Island or North America. And Dr. Forbes had a really unique and original interpretation of that fateful meeting. That yes, we know Columbus brought the, quote, age of discovery and the idea of imperialism and really extractivism, and seeing the colony as a place to exploit resources, including humans and labor. It was also religious because of really not seeing indigenous peoples as human because they were not Christian. Many layers to that. But what Jack D. Forbes said is that Columbus had been infected with a type of cannibalism. And now it wasn't eating the human flesh, ingesting it like we eat food, but it was destroying life. It was needlessly destroying life, destroying the forest, looking for gold, destroying mountains, hillsides, killing Native Americans, and that was like a mental illness that was a contagion and actually could infect anybody. It could infect Native people because we know that the early colonists privileged male leaders over female leaders, which really didn't happen as much in a lot of Native American societies. The gender balance and gender relations were very different. And so when Columbus and the early colonists came, of course, it was the males who were the dominant leaders in their patriarchal worldview. So they brought in this patriarchal worldview, very sexist worldview, misogynist in a way. We know what happened to a lot of women in Europe just prior to this time. They were burning them at the stake for being witches if they were close to the earth or didn't want to be married to men or use traditional medicines and things. So this was like a mental illness was Forbes's hypothesis, and that it infected the people, the first settlers who came to Turtle Island, and then sadly spread sometimes to even Native men, especially, who became also engulfed in this kind of power over, this dominating spirit. And it goes back to a traditional myth and story. The Lenni Lenape of the East Coast are sometimes called the grandfathers of even the Anishinaabe Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, the Odawa. We all speak an Algonquian root language and share some common stories. We call it the Wendigo. And in his language, it was Wetiko or Wetiko. And it's this really dark, evil cannibalistic spirit that just is insatiable, and it's a symbol of greed and hunger and selfishness, that destroys landscapes and destroys whole cultures. So it was part of our oral tradition to always be wary of Wendigo or Wetiko, that it was always lurking kind of in the consciousness and psyche of humans. There was this part of ourselves that could take over like a disease. So very powerful. And I think it fell a little bit on not deaf ears, but I think it was so radical in the 90s. I think it was kind of a cult classic book. Some of us studied it in depth and worked with him, and many people, resonated with it, but many people did not. And, fast forward 30, 40, 50 years, well, not quite 50, but 30 years later, it's finally, people are really recognizing it as being prophetic in a way about the extractivist conquest mindset and worldview that we still see, sadly, in the world today.
Right. And so would you say that capitalism is really a symptom of that disease? Really, it's not the actual disease, it's the disease is fueling it and has caused it, but that capitalism is a symptom, and not to get that confused with sort of the idea, really a Christian mindset of the original sin idea, almost like humans are inherently flawed, versus, as one elder told me, one indigenous elder told me at one point, highlighting that difference of, well, and he said, to paraphrase, in Christian belief, you have to wait to die to go to heaven. Well, our God loved us enough to put us straight into heaven, and here we are, like we are in Eden. And so that really gets down to this idea of human nature. And when you and I spoke about what we wanted to bring into this conversation today, you talked about how Forbes asked, why should we accept a definition of human nature given to us by a civilization engaged in several thousand years of barbarism? And so it really comes down to, what is the nature of humanity? And really, in looking at it through that lens, all of this destruction and the rampant capitalism, in-stage capitalism, and the climate crisis, and all of these things stemming from this is really an aberration of human nature, that it comes down to, this is really not what human beings are, real human beings. This is an aberration. And that's a really important point. You've talked about this, you talk about this some in your chapter of the book, and other folks did too. Would you like to address that a little bit more?
Yes, I think that's such an important point, that through intellectual colonialism that accompanied actual colonialism and imperialism, this idea, this Judeo-Christian idea of original sin, and that the earth is really a place of sin, and that we're only temporary here to get to the promised land or get to heaven above, as you said so well. It made us disregard life. It created this like aberrant worldview that was disregarding this life, because it was merely a stepping stone to another place. Whereas our indigenous worldviews, this earth is sacred. Our human bodies are sacred. To wake up every morning and see the sunrise, and to be able to breathe air and drink water and have family and friends and affection and see the beautiful trees and plants, like, this is such a gift. And indigenous cultures the world over traditionally had annual ceremonies and rituals and seasonal cycles. We just went through spring renewal, and many world religions do celebrate it in some way, Ramadan and Easter. And so, there's remnants, like little artifacts of these worldviews, but a lot of indigenous cultures pre-colonial practice these ways to not forget that, and to remember our relationality, and to remember reverence and sacredness and gratitude. What other elders have called original instructions. And I put together a collection of voices of Indigenous people talking about our original instructions. And each tribe is different, each community is different, very place-based, very distinct with our different languages. But we have our own place-based original instructions that remind us gratitude is one of those most important things. So when this aberrant conquest consciousness came in the Wendigo or Wetiko disease, it just has thrown the whole world upside down, and it's sadly spread around the world. And so that now we have extractive capitalism, we have sexism, we have racism, we have white supremacy, we have this exploitive attitude with consumerism where everything is based on things. And it's interesting, another Native author, Robin Wall Kimmerer, writes about Wendigo capitalism. So does Winona LaDuke, and really uses again what Jack D. Forbes started by looking at the way capitalism is exploiting Indigenous lands, Indigenous bodies with pollution, with extraction, with oil, with uranium, with the siting of toxic waste, etc. Indigenous peoples are still targeted for those kinds of environmental racist projects. And she talks about how important it is to, immunize ourselves from this Wendigo virus. And we do that by our original instructions. We do that by our ethical frameworks. We do that by following those on a daily basis in our relationships. And she also talks about this idea that even our languages, how the English language is so based on nouns, so based on things and objects. It puts us in this very consumerist mindset, whereas our Algonquian language of the Ojibwe and the Potawatomi, the Lenni Lenape, actually the Blackfeet, so many are languages verb-based. So it was more based on process and flows and activities that were in movement and fluid, and things were not so focused on acquiring objects. And so she even says that the way the English language has colonized the mind also makes us more vulnerable to the Wendigo or the Wetiko, as opposed to our own languages that don't give as much supreme importance to consumerism and materialism.
And thank you for that. And another of the anecdotes that you talk about it in your chapter in the book, as did Dr. Kyle White, was kinship. And I'll just read you one quote from his chapter. He said, "Kinship refers to relationships of mutual responsibility, where we care for each other and we create bonds with each other that make it so that regardless of what the law says, and regardless of how severe a problem is, or regardless of what our rights are, we have an abiding sense that we need to care for others." And he goes on to talk about other being, of course, human beings, and all the other species, and the tree people and the waters. I mean, he expands that out to include everything. And kinship was a topic that beautifully really threaded its way into just about every single chapter of this book. And that was one of the great joys of writing it, was posing these questions to all of you. And nobody knew what anybody else had said or was going to say. And just watching these threads weave their way through the book. It was this really beautiful, spiritual, organic thing that just happened. And that's another reason why Stan and I called ourselves editors of the book and not authors, because all we did was our best to just hold each of you up, what you said, the best that we could absolutely represent that, and just let this come through. And each person in that way really just was this instrument, if you will. And as these textures just beautifully weave themselves together. And kinship, I would really, you talk about this some in your chapter as well, but would you talk a little bit about how you see that, not just in regards to being the antidote, one of the antidotes to Waitiko, but really something that can hold us together through this time, kinship with each other and with all living things.
Exactly. Well, thank you for articulating that, and that beautiful quote by Kyle, who writes and speaks so eloquently about kinship as our foundational being, is our responsibility, and again encoded in so many indigenous languages, where to be a human being means we are constantly in relationship with others. We cannot be a human being without the food that we eat, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe, the parents that we come from, the offspring, if we, create new generations, all our relations. The Lakota often say, all our relations, Homatakwiasin, and all different indigenous peoples in our own languages. I often greet people Buju Nindinwe Maganatug, that's Anishinaabemowin, that means I see you all as my relatives. And if you interpret, Alarian mentions one of the chapters too from Alaska, Native Alaska, also the Mayans, often the way they greet each other is, hello to my other self, hello to my other self. And so built within a lot of indigenous worldviews and languages is this idea that we are a collective. We cannot exist without a collective of beings and organisms that even make up our digestive tract so we can eat food, and that we have to be in this reverential reciprocity with that which gives life, and that we are only here a short time, this little collection of molecules that we call the self, and just a short blip in the history of the cosmos. And we are stardust. We have stories about, being stardust. And of course, this is all being, quote, proven now by Western science about how many microorganisms humans are made up of, and how the stardust rains on us every day and we incorporate it into our cells. And so that's just built in, that we are in kinship with all of life, whether we recognize it or not, or act like it or not. And yet we need to be responsible for that life, because with every act, with every breath, we impact the whole. And again, quantum physics talks about this now as well, the non-local effects that happen with life across the planet. And so it's so important to act and care for each other, and that when somebody suffers, we all suffer. And I think I mentioned when we were talking in the chapter, it was kind of at the peak of one of the peaks of the virus, and our breath. We couldn't share breath with each other anymore. One of the most sacred things, the word spirit in so many languages, is we are inspired. We are full of breath, the breath of life that gives us life. And the first thing a baby does is breathe, and the last thing we do when we die is exhale. And so, we couldn't share breath anymore because we would infect each other. And I think that's so powerful. And that just shows how close, how the kinship we have with each other. My exhale is your inhale, and vice versa. And we're also inhaling the breath of the trees every day. So remembering our kinship and honoring that kinship, and having daily practices of gratitude for that kinship is really a key to indigenous compassion, and empathy and care. So yeah, it's great to hear that was such an important through line throughout the whole book.
And listening to you describe this again, very similar to some of the conversations during our interview with you for the chapter, it strikes me as how functional these, I'm not going to call them beliefs, these facts are, that it's often still couched as indigenous beliefs or things like this, but whether we're talking about the concept of kinship or ceremony, that these really these ways of living are functional. And as a Stan and another a friend of his said, "Hey, we do these things because they work." And I
That's
think
right.
that so much of what you and others in the book talked about were, listening to you, it's just okay. We can apply this directly to this is how we're going to get through this together. Just not just leaning on each other, but what does kinship really, really entail? And it entails acting in a very, very responsible way. And that's another thing that Kyle in his chapter, he talked about that, just a really, really deep issue of responsibility. And I just like to read a few more sentences of that. He said, "We need to be responsible for each other. And that's not just confined to the human to human context, but depending on the culture, to all living beings and non-living entities and systems. So responsibility is a really important way of understanding kinship. Responsibility is a type of relationship. As we know, because we have a responsibility in relation to somebody else, that's a shared responsibility, but only going to work if each of us has a profound respect for reciprocity, for consent, for trust, for transparency, and confidentiality. You can only really have a responsibility that's working and functioning if you have these qualities." And hold that up to how things are done in the business world,
Oh
for
my
example.
goodness.
and
Yes,
it becomes stark.
the stark contrast is just outrageous. Yeah, I love that excerpt from Kyle's chapter and his emphasis on responsibility. And Kyle and I've had conversations about this idea. Many Native scholars, we're now writing about, treaties, and this idea that, again, is part of our worldview, is that we don't just have treaties people think of as nation to nation, like the US and Canada have a treaty, or even maybe between tribes, the Navajo and Acoma Pueblo have a treaty. We still have this very human-centered idea of what a treaty is, a mutual agreement of respect and responsibility and mutual obligation and transparency and trust, all those things that Kyle just outlined so beautifully in the quote. But a treaty, we have treaties with our seeds that give us life, our maize, our corn. We have all those obligations. They're often even called, covenants. We have covenants with the blueberries and the bears, because we have to share the blueberries with the bears. So we need to have a three-part treaty and agreement. This is based on a beautiful traditional teaching from Otis Parrish, a Kushaya Pomo elder, who shared this incredible story of this three-part treaty between his nation and the huckleberries, it actually was, and then the bears, and how they have to negotiate place and space and food and timing with care and responsibility and mutuality, so everyone eats and is safe and fed, and there will be more huckleberries next season for everyone to be fed and safe. So these are these treaties we have with animals, with plants, with our food, and even with what people would call inanimate beings, the rock beings, the grandfathers, with mountains. In Northern California, the Winnemem Wintu are caretakers of Mount Shasta. They have sacred responsibilities and obligations to take care of that mountain, and that mountain spirit and land takes care of them. And that's the whole concept of sacred places that are so important for Indigenous peoples. Our sacred places are nature. They're not in a church or a mosque or a synagogue. That's great for other peoples. For Indigenous peoples, are sacred places where we have these responsibilities of reverence and care and love. They happen with our more than human kin, and the salmon nation. The salmon are suffering right now, and how important it is to restore the salmon. And the salmon people of the Pacific Northwest that is, it's a religious violation to not be able to care for your sacred relatives, like the salmon. For the Blackfeet people, they've restored the bison, the mighty buffalo, to not have that relationship. It's not just food. It's not just, clothing or using the bones for tools. It's actually part of this cosmic responsibility, as well as the very practical benefit of mutuality and kinship with these relatives.
And you touched on it a little bit there, but another one of the things that I think is important for us to talk about is trauma and unresolved or unhealed trauma. And one young woman we interviewed, Raquel Ramirez, had this great quote. She just cut all the way to the chase in her interview. She said, "We all need to go to therapy as a collective nation." Because
Yes.
she, along with Tani Henningsen, also talked about both of them saying, first of all, we have to acknowledge what happened. And one of the other themes of the book is bringing truth into history of this is why we have to talk about the genocide and why we have to talk about and acknowledge what actually happened here with Indigenous people. And I think it'd be really beneficial if you felt like talking about why is that? Why now? It's assumed, probably the majority of the people watching this understand it, but yet why do we need to amend the history books? Why is it so imperative that we get this right?
Mm. Yes, I mean, this nation was, built on many things, but largely on the genocide of Native Americans and the enslavement of African people. And also the ecocide of the land, just driving species extinct, from over harvesting and just killing them needlessly. The miners, when they came in with their guns, would just decimate elk populations, and the people on the trains would decimate the buffalo, and then they would go out and kill Native Americans and get a bounty. In California, state-sanctioned genocide in California. And so these are the dirty little secrets, the shadow on this nation that it has not been fully revealed. And if we don't acknowledge it, it will fester, and it's a festering wound in the psyche, the collective psyche. Eduardo Duran has called this the soul wound of the psyche, not only for the descendants of those who did survive. We did survive. We are still here. Not everyone, though. Some tribes were really, really driven to near extinction, and our numbers really depleted to just a handful of survivors. There are some tribes that are descendant of like 10 survivors. It's just incredible of some of the massacres that happen here. And until that is revealed and aired out and understood, and witnessed and acknowledged, there cannot be healing for the colonized or the colonizer. The colonizer carries that weight as well. And, when I look at some of the statistics of depression and suicide and dependence on pharmaceuticals and overdoses, it's just frightening, and it's just shocking and sad to see that there is like this collective weight in the world, and certainly in America right now. And once we are able to expose to the light of day some of these festering dark wounds and tell truth in history, as Canyon Sayers Rude says so beautifully, and Anne-Marie Sayers has said forever, there cannot be real healing. There has to be that truth and reckoning. I don't really use the word reconciliation, even though that's used in Canada with the truth and reconciliation process. It was used in South Africa. I think that's an important move, the truth and reconciliation process, and different forms of restorative justice. We absolutely need that to heal at the personal level and at the collective level and at the ecological level. We need to heal our landscapes.
Right, right. And I think another, just talking, looking at these as far as kind of how we referenced kinship earlier, is an antidote, and what you just shared is another. And another one is certainly was for me when I really started getting into working on the book and just having a very, very personal relationship with each interviewee, as Stan and I would edit the chapters and send them back and forth and get to know them increasingly deeply each time. And along with that, as I watched kind of my brain and my perspective being changed and widened out just by the perspective of time. And again, Kyle White talks a lot about linear time versus nonlinear time and deep time. And you spoke to this as well, which I would really, if you feel like going there, like to hear you talk about that a little bit this evening. But also the idea of, one thing that Lila June Johnston talked about in her chapter with us, and she brings this up in many of her talks, is that they understand that they've already been through the destruction and rebirth of several worlds before this one that we're currently in. And I thought that's another extremely helpful tool, just for just like, let's just open the aperture up very, very wide here. And that brought a really new level of grounding for me. Yeah, would you feel like talking to that a bit?
Sure. I mean, some elders I've heard in different Indigenous, friends and colleagues say, climate change is, oh, deja vu, or, racial inequities. It's like, oh, deja vu. I mean, we've been here before, right? And we have these stories in our oral traditions going back millennia and, tens of thousands of years to the last ice ages. And so, oh, here we are again. And whether it's the Dene, the Navajo stories of the fourth world, or many, many different prophecies have foretold this time. Our Anishinaabe people have the seventh fire prophecy that talks about times when people forgot the original instructions and suffered, and the world went into chaos. What we're going into now, a form of chaos on multiple levels, sociologically, economically, climate, personally, with the virus, biologically. And so it has been foretold that when humans forget our original instructions, forget our kinship, forget our responsibilities, chaos ensues. I think Lila referred to it as the coyote. It makes us kind of fertile ground for the Wetiko virus to get in. And then it becomes a positive feedback loop, not in a good way, but meaning a runaway effect of just destruction breeding destruction. Again, with that unconsciousness, also not revealing the truth of history, and just repeating these lies over and over again, that we start to believe them. And that kind of chaotic episode has happened in the past before, and people have suffered, and people disappeared and went underground, or the earth was flooded, or fires. And that's what we're seeing now with climate change, fires and floods. It is quite, we say biblical, but it is, many different original stories, sacred stories, have these warnings about these times. And that also, so on one level, it says, why aren't we learning? What are humans destined to repeat mistakes, even though we have these warning stories in so many of our sacred texts and traditions? Why aren't we just changing? So that's the negative part of it. The positive part of it is, for Indigenous people, it's like, we're resilient. We've been through this before. We've survived plagues and climate change and dislocations and near attempted genocide. And we are still standing, and we are still here. And we will get through this. We have adaptive strategies, and we have our antidotes and our immunization to the Wetiko disease, and our kinship and our original instructions, and going back to the earth. One of my favorite quotes is by a dear teacher, Blackfoot elder Leroy Little Bear. And he says, as Indigenous peoples, we find our cultural resilience in the medicines of the land. The land gives us medicine, but we have forgotten that, and we've stopped listening to the medicine of the land and the medicine of the ancestors. And so, and the beat of the drum, you know, and so we did not forget that. And that's why Indigenous peoples are still here, and we will get through this. And we have resilient strategies so that we're not as, how to put it, I mean, we're vulnerable in many ways because we're targeted, but we're also very strong, very strong.
I'd like to read a quote from Fawn Sharp. When we interviewed her, she was president of the Quinault Nation, which is, I'm in Washington State, and it's just out on the West Coast here. I'm pointing because it's that way, but she's currently the president of the National Congress of American Indians, and is still, last I checked, vice president of the Quinault Nation. And speaking to what you just said, and I'd like to read this quote, and then if you feel like it, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about values that you pointed at just now and what she does in this quote. She said, ultimately, the solution to the crisis lies in our values, and we've proven that simply by existing today, regardless of how we had the most powerful country in the world try to destroy us, terminate us, and assimilate us. We lived under great pain and suffering. They carried out murder and genocide and attempted full-scale annihilation, but they never could stop that drumbeat in our heart. One could either just wither away like paper or be like steel that just grows stronger and stronger. When the most powerful country in 400 years can't stop you, you know it is because of our resources, prayers, and blessings, and everything that has been across this land since time began. And we not only have survived, but we are now emerging even stronger.
Whew. Yes, I mean, that just gave me chills. That just gave me chills. Yeah. So
She
beautiful.
talks and about the values.
The values, it's the values, and they can't just be empty words. They have to be lived values, embodied values. We should really even forget them as words like kinship or reverence. How does it feel in our heart? How does it feel in our body? How does it feel when we see a stranger? How does it feel when we, you know, see houseless people on the street? Like, what is our response? And that's responsibility, right? It's based on responding, not reacting, not being blindly reacting, or shutting down, right? This cultural amnesia, forgetting the past. There's a lot of shutting down that happens in this country. I don't want to see that. I don't want to talk about that. That's the past. I don't. And again, that's when those festering shadows or wounds or hungry ghosts come up to haunt us. And so to be open, to be responsible in these times of great change, with an open heart, it's not easy, right? It's not easy. It keeps us humble. It's a daily practice. But again, the kinship of Indigenous solidarity with each other and our ceremonies and those instructions and those values, those living values, embodied values. It's very pragmatic. You know, a lot of people want to think Indigenous people are all mystical with stereotypes of the mystical. It's very pragmatic. You know, it works. We've survived this, all of that, because it works. So that care for each other is just essential.
And that is, again, back to what Stan mentioned that I pointed to earlier about just that the book is functional, and what you and everybody else in the book talked about, as you just said, is it's functional. it's proven to work because you're still here.
That's
And
right.
all of the indigenous people in this book and their people are still here. If it didn't work, you simply would not be here. It's really that simple. And I'm just trying to find a way to kind of triple underline what you just said, that it's you're so articulate, and it's eloquent how you talk about this, but getting down to the brass tacks of it is that it's been a survival situation just for indigenous people and other marginalized communities. Now we're all in this survival situation because of really a global epidemic of Wetiko. And
Yes.
and now we're in what's often referred to as the polycrisis. And we don't know where it's going. We don't know how it's going to end. But just from really being steeped in all of the wisdom from what you shared and the other 19 people in the book of the years that it took us working on this project, it shifted me from I was Dr. Doom by the end of my climate book. I was for sure humans are going extinct within 100 years. And Stan challenged me on that. We were actually looking at the Quinault Nation website, learning more information about Fawn before we were about to reach out to her for an interview. And I was still in Dr. Doom mode. And I was so sure of it. And he said, okay, scroll down to the bottom of the website, which I did. He said, you see those little kids, and there's this beautiful picture of a bunch of very, very young kids wearing traditional clothing. And he said, are you going to look at those kids in the face and tell them that they don't have a future? And it just stopped me. I almost cried, and I was like, no, there's no way in hell I would do something like that. And he said, all right, well, you've got to find a better way, don't you? And it's everything that you've been talking about, and it's everything that everybody in the book talked about, that yeah, things look absolutely dire, but we don't know for sure what's going to happen. And no matter what, and this kind of brings us into how are we going to comport ourselves? Results are none of our business. We can't control them anyway. But and this gets down to really living what you've been talking about this evening. Like, if you could take everything that you've just kind of spoken towards for almost an hour, and how do we comport ourselves? How do we walk this going forward? Would you feel like talking about that a little bit?
Well, sure. And it kind of brings me back to your earlier comment and question about time. I think that you picked such a perfect title also for the book. It's a John Trudell quote, right? We are
Right.
in the middle of forever. And again, as Indigenous peoples, if we want to, we know that many worlds have come and gone, many worlds, with humans, without humans, other worlds. And again, physics and astronomy, astrophysics proves this too. Creation and destruction are an essential part of life. This Americana idea of, pro-life and continuing consumerism and development and progress has denied the death and destruction and the natural part of life that is the cycle of creation and destruction. And that we are simply in the middle of forever, that life will continue, and that some parts of life is death. Death is a natural part of life. You cannot have life without death. And so this denial of death and denial of the history and the denial of colonialism has just created such a fictional part of life. And so to make ourselves more vulnerable to life means we also do need to be open to death and to change. And that's another part of Indigenous cultures and worldviews, is that we honor death practices, we honor things decomposing, we honor compost, sacred compost. There's so many things we need to compost. That's another way you can heal. I saw one of the questions is like, if you're infected by Wetiko disease, we can compost those values of consumerism, of extractivism, of greed, of selfishness. We can compost them in ourselves and transform them. And that's part of true transformation, is being able to see things freshly, and you know, they disappear when we see them with fresh eyes and we're willing to let things go. And I think Native people, we've had a lot of tragedy, we've had a lot of loss, we continue to. That's really, that struggle is part of our daily life as well. But we have ways of living with it, and finding balance with it. So it may not sound like a very hopeful way, but to embrace life and get through this, to comport ourselves, it means we also must be vulnerable to understanding death and decay and transformation, and seeing things with clear eyes and open hearts.
And would you say that it also comes down to that obligation that is inherent with kinship? Of that
Yes.
responsibility, that no matter what, I am going to keep doing the right thing, trying to save the salmon or this tree or help my people or whatever it is, no matter how dark the skies might look at this point. But down again, back to that sacred obligation inherent within kinship, that I am responsible for you. I am responsible for everyone that I come in contact with, you know, if we're going to really live that going forward, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's the daily acts. I mean, we get, speaking of time, linear time, we worry about the future. All, you know, so much of us are not present, and we just worry about this future. This whole society is all about future oriented, this linear time progression. And we really need presence, because when we fall into presence, being here now, as the mystics say, we can enter the timeless, and we can also really feel what we need to feel and care for each other and listen to each other in new ways.
And then behave accordingly.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much. And it looks like
Thank
we
you.
are that concludes our formal conversation. And then I think now it looks like we're getting ready to move into the question and answer session.
Wonderful.
And it looks like there's a few queued up there.
All right. Shall I go ahead and share one of the questions, Dahr, and we can see how we want to respond?
Please.
Excellent. Here's from one of our attendees. Thank you both for this discussion. I'd like to know a couple of examples of how capitalism is ingrained in our language, and how the indigenous languages have more motion, movement in theirs. Thank you. That's a great question. I guess this is very relevant and personal for me also. I am, as a member of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa tribe, part of my lineage are the Métis people of Canada. And the Métis people are recognized as an Indigenous people in Canada. The word Métis simply means mixed race. And it's because I have a lot of French grandfathers, great-great-grandfathers, and a lot of Ojibwe and Cree, Nakota women ancestors. And so we actually created, my ancestors created a mixed language called Michif, which is half French and half Ojibwe or Cree and Cree. It's actually 3 languages. Ojibwe and Cree are very similar, but they sound different. They're based on the same root language. And so the French fur trappers were here for economic gain, to gain furs. And so most of our language is based on French nouns: kettles, furs, trees, canoes, houses, money, because that was based on things, and our Ojibwe and Cree words are almost all of the verbs, and it was very gendered. So the male French fur trappers wanted stuff. They came here for stuff. They knew it was strategic. So did my great-great-grandmothers, foremothers. They knew it was strategic also to be in relationship with these French men, because that meant survival for their children and their families. And they were all about the verbs and the actions and the doing things in relationship with the land. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but it shows how the English language and the Indo-European languages, very noun-based, really focused on objects. And then the Algonquian root language is very much based on actions and movement and flows. So there's much more I could go into, and I could give you some references if you want to email me separately. But thank you for asking that question. And I hope the explanation of the Michif language and that colonial encounter between the fur trappers and the indigenous women makes some sense with the Michif language.
I think it very much so spoke directly to the question. Thank you, Melissa. And I'll go ahead and ask the question, because if you will, I think this is another one for you from Cynthia. Once a person is infected with the Wendigo disease, is there a medicine that can cure it, even if the person doesn't seek help or see it as a problem? Question mark.
Oh, goodness. Wow. Well, I'm of the mind, thank you for the question. I'm of the mind that people can only change when we want to change. I can only change when I want to change, right? Anyone who's been in a relationship with another human being, I think, can know that. You know, our partners, our spouses, our lovers, some of their behavior may drive us crazy, and we may say it politely, oh, can you do it this way? Or we may get mad and say, oh, it drives me mad. But that doesn't usually elicit a real change. So another old saying, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But I think we can invite transformation. We can expose people to new ideas. We can invite people out on the land to hike, to meet, to listen to new ideas. So my theory of change is about inviting people to the table, so to speak, or the campfire, to listen to stories maybe they haven't considered before, to maybe relook, respect, to look again at a plant or an animal, to see it with fresh eyes. And so I think it's very, very hard to make someone change if they don't want to. But I think we can invite transformation. We can also hold up a mirror and make people accountable for their own actions, right? Like a lot of the political resistance movement that is holding up a mirror, you know, and sometimes chaining themselves to corporate headquarters and saying, look, this is the impact of your actions on my people, on my land. When you're drilling oil in my sacred lands, this is the impact. So I do think that the carrot and the stick approach is helpful to invite change and treat people with respect, you know, because the shaming and blaming tactic doesn't usually work. Yeah. So I hope that helped answer your question. And if you want to be really stealth, I guess you can, let's see. No, I was going to be silly there. Put something in someone's water, right? Homeopathic medicine, right? Homeopathic medicine.
Right. I'll to give you a little bit of a break, because
Thank you.
going to keep coming back to you if you're willing, because I think a lot of these questions I'm just gonna have to keep deferring to you if you're up for it. But I want to read one thing from the book after this next question, but then it's going to come back to you. So the question is, I'm a master's student studying addiction counseling. What would you hope the new generation of the therapists / counselors bring to the field in regards to collective healing? And that brought to mind this wonderful quote from Edgar Ibarra, a young man that we interviewed, and he talks about sweat lodge. I just want to read a short bit of his words. He said, "As soon as I went into a sweat lodge, it began a process. It changed my perspective on things. But when it really hit home for me was 2 years ago after a ceremony, and I was able to really understand why it took me this long. It was about generational healing. That medicine that I was receiving in that lodge wasn't just for me. It was for my grandma who never hugged my mother. It was for my grandma's grandma who left when they were kids, and for my grandpa from when he got killed. It was for when my father was a kid, for my father who was incarcerated and never dealt with it. It was the healing for them and us, but it was also the healing for my sisters and my brother, with my sisters having to watch my mom go through all the shit, from heart problems to diabetes to being in an immigrant detention center, risking getting deported, having to see her go through that, and me missing that. That's when I finally realized why it took me this long, understanding that it has never been about me. I'm just a small part of everything that's going on." Over to you.
Wow. Wow. The collective healing is so critically important. And I do think it starts with ourselves and knowing that we can never walk in someone else's moccasins. We all suffer and we all need collective healing. And we all have different burdens. So as a therapist and as a counselor, I'm sure you're very well aware of that. But getting to this collective grief in our country and looking at the soul wound and working to uncover where those little hidden pockets of guilt and sadness and dread and loneliness and despair. I mean, there's a lot of issues that we need healing on. And I think just start wherever people are willing to start, because that's the first thing. We need to be willing to heal. And I think you're learning these practices. I think addiction is, self-medicating from a crazy world. It's very hard to live a balanced life in an unbalanced world. And so a lot of young people are in despair. But doing something positive every day for somebody else or a place, tending plants, tending to animals, caring for an elder, caring for someone who lives alone, teaching children, volunteering for nonprofit organizations, going out and pulling weeds in gardens, watering. For me, it's really about my hands in the dirt and my hands in the earth. And also, when I want something from someone else, give it. That was a teaching to me shared by the great Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. It's like when you're feeling lonely, then go talk to someone who looks like they're sad and lonely too. Like give the very thing that you're wanting in your own life. And I think that's just such a beautiful way of addressing some of this collective trauma and collective healing. Hope that helped, Haley. Thank you and good luck. You're doing such important work around addiction counseling. Underneath those addictions are deep traumas and people just trying to self-medicate and find balance.
Right. And so, a lot of that harkens back to what you talked about earlier in our conversation, just about and what several other people in the book talked about with the unrecognized, unhealed traumas and things that are ongoing. I can't remember whether it was Raquel or Tani in the book talked about it's awful hard to heal, from post-traumatic stress disorder when it's not when it's just
ongoing, continuing.
Right.
daily traumas, microaggressions, discrimination, land exploitation. Yeah, it's very hard. Yeah, a real juggling act.
Yeah. And then going to another question from John. Where does prosperity fit in with Indigenous culture, or does it? Are we Indigenous people doomed to poverty? It seems that if we pursue wealth or any type of work-life balance, we're going against our cultural beliefs.
Ooh, wow. That is a great question, John. Thank you so much. Oh gosh, I think Indigenous peoples value prosperity and wealth very much, but it's a different definition of wealth. I love always quoting from my Hawaiian brothers and sisters. Their word for water is vai, and their word for wealth is vai, water, water. And, this is from island nations that are surrounded by water, but they're surrounded by salt water. So fresh water for the Hawaiian people is still such a sign of wealth, that they managed in their streams and their ahupua'a, and how important it is to have a relationship with fresh, clean water. And all Indigenous peoples have concepts of prosperity and well-being. It's not so much, again, about material accumulation as it is about giving things away. The famous potlatch of the Pacific Northwest, the Indigenous leaders, the chiefs and their longhouses would amass some wealth because they're forest people. There's a lot of stuff in the forest, berries and baskets and clam shells and abalone shells and all kinds of things that are used for material culture, but then boxes, totems, and then to be able to give it away, to just give it all away. There's a long gift, and the Plains tribes too, of the giveaway. We have a powwow still. We put out a blanket and everyone gives, whether it's $1 or whatever, and then a family that maybe needs it at that time, we give it away. It's a way of redistributing wealth. Sign of health, again, there's that flow again. There's that verb again. Wealth should not be accumulated and solidified and static. It gets toxic. It should flow. Wealth should be redistributed. And so there's many, many stories of prosperity and well-being. And I've recently been working with the wonderful Maori scholar and sister, Rachel Wolfgram, who writes about economies of well-being and trying to shift even the New Zealand economy to be infused with Maori concepts of well-being as the core of their gross national happiness, like Bhutan has and some other places. So we are not destined to be doomed to poverty, but it's really hard for Indigenous peoples to interact with the current way capitalism is being done in the market economy. There's no doubt about that. And we see, the pros and cons of the casino tribes and tribes that have had to take oil drilling or things like that. It's a slippery slope. So you ask such a powerful question, John, and I hope I address some of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Thank you for the question, John. Another one, this is actually related a bit. Could you please discuss some key teachings from the worldviews of Native traditions, which could counteract the pull towards exploitation in our current US society? It would be helpful to hear about some concepts to meditate on myself and to share with people I meet in day-to-day life.
Well, I'll speak, each tradition is different. I cannot speak for all traditions at all. I can only speak for, my Ojibwe ones and some of the teachings I've been very blessed to learn and hear from many different traditions. But I think we need to really look at teachings in our own ancestral traditions. As John Trudell said, all people on Earth are indigenous to Earth, and we were all indigenous to some place originally. And it's so important, not to look to Native people as a panacea or, as the solution. We have a lot of healing to do within our own communities first, and take care of ourselves. Native people are very generous, some more than others, some more willing to share than others. Right now, I know a lot of Indigenous folks are very, very happy to share more. Others are not. And so you have to be just careful when you're looking to Native traditions for adopting some of those ways, but some of these values are very universal. In the Ojibwe tradition, we have something called the seven grandfathers, sometimes called the seven ancestors or the seven grandmothers. Long, elaborate story about a boy and a water drum. Too much to go into here. But the end result is that there was an interaction with seven distinct animals also. So these are values related to ancestral spirits and also related to animals. And there are things like courage and humility and truth and honesty and bravery and wisdom and love. And they're all represented by different animals in the seven grandfather teachings. And you can find some things online about it from different Ojibwe elders in US and Canada. So those would be some key teachings from my Ojibwe worldview. And I referenced earlier the seven fires prophecy. Within that, we have very specific teachings too. But I would say, humility, gratitude, reciprocity, these are human values, and we need a lot more of humility, gratitude, and reciprocity in the world. So those would be beautiful things to meditate on.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Melissa. And I guess we'll go a little bit longer. We are starting to come closer to the end a little bit, but another question straight to you, Melissa, is how can white and non-Indigenous people be the better allies and supporters of Indigenous land back movements?
Thank you for that question. Wow. Well, I can't assume you're all in the Bay Area because CIIS is, but if you are in the Bay Area, there's a wonderful organization, the Sagorate Land Trust, the village of Lishan, Ohlone people and Ohlone villages in the East Bay in the Oakland area. And they have something called the Shumi tax, and it's a voluntary tax. There's also one up in the Eureka Arcata area with the Wiyot Nation, where you can actually contribute. It may be $1 a month, it may be $50 a month, it could be a one-time donation, but it's an opportunity to contribute to the land back movement and the land rematriation movement of local California Indian people. And there's also one, I think, up in your area, Dahr, in Washington State. I can't remember the name of it and which nation it is. It's really catching on. I think there's also one in the East Coast now with some of the tribes where they're creating this voluntary tax. And people are really contributing to it because people want to give back. They know they're on stolen land. They know that they're on native land. You are on native land. And the land back movement and the land rematriation movement is so powerful. And you can bequeath land, you can donate land, you can volunteer time. Maybe you have legal expertise or real estate expertise or water quality testing expertise. These are all things that Native communities need support with in our land back initiatives and efforts. So it's important to educate yourself, do your own research, be of service, go with an open mind when you offer your services. They may not accept them, right? That Native people are very busy doing 1,200 jobs. It may not be the right time, but offer your services, offer your donations, offer to be an accomplice, right? It's good to be an ally, and it's also good to be an accomplice. You will stand up for Native rights. You will stand up for against racism. You will correct history books or, write letters to the editor when they say things like, oh, the Ohlone are extinct, or they're not here anymore. So it's really important to stand up in solidarity as white allies and accomplices to Indigenous peoples and to promote land back and land repatriation, because we are caretakers of the world's biodiversity, and we want a thriving future for all life, including all people.
Yeah, there's that one statistic that I think says so much, and you just pointed to it.
Alluded to it, yes.
Alluded to it. 85% of all remaining biodiversity on the planet is on native-owned land. And we look at
Yes.
how much of the land left is actually native-owned. That just underscores how absolutely critical that is. And another thing that came up working on the book, kind of pointing to this question a little bit too, is another thing people could do is simply reach out to the people, the original owners, or the original people on the land where you live, and simply just reach out and ask what you can do to help. And just like what you just said, it might be nothing. You might, your offer might not be accepted, but that's a really great starting place.
Yes, it is.
And again, action being the antidote to despair is certainly true.
Yes. And keep showing up, go to gatherings, go to events. In fact, tomorrow up at Humboldt, Cal Poly, I think they changed their name. I still call it Humboldt State University. There's a big land back, the Northern California Land Back symposium or conference, and it's going to be an awesome gathering. And there's going to be a lot about strategy and how to be good allies and accomplices and work together, nation to nation, tribe to tribe, with conservation organizations and universities. So this is a really exciting growing movement, and we need a lot of support and help. So thank you for that offer, and offer your services.
And looks, we're on the last question, which actually is going to be, I think, a great way to end this. It's a gratitude for the book and deep thanks to both of us. And the question is, what is the source of your inspiration, strength, and joy, which you so clearly convey? How do you avoid falling into despair?
Thank you for that question. I'm in love with Mother Earth, and because she's in love with me. So, looking up at the stars at night, looking at the clouds, the trees. I was fortunate to grow up in the mighty redwoods of, Sinkyone and Yuki territory in Northern California. I mean, when you look at the miraculousness of the redwood trees, and, there's just such beauty and joy in the natural world. And yes, sometimes horror and despair of, being eaten and decomposition. But, I guess my love of biology and life, I'm a true biophiliac. I love life and life loves me. And I think if we're present and slow down to receive the gift of breathing right now, of having food in my belly, of having this great conversation with beautiful people, I think that there is a lot to be joyful for in the moment. When the mind wants to go, oh my God, in the future, what if? Oh no, and then this and that and that. Then I can fall into, worrying about the future. But when I look in the present right now, I'm privileged to be alive. I'm privileged to be alive at this time. And some would say it's no coincidence that we are the ones who are here right now at this precipice, at this transformational moment in the history of the world. We are in the middle of forever, and let's get through this together.
Yeah. And I think for me, that really just being steeped in the wisdom in this book, listening to you, Melissa, going back, I had the privilege of getting to write up your chapter in the book, and then the other, Stan and I basically just did them every other one, and it just happened to be I was lucky enough to get yours. And I think just the years that we worked on the project and just being pulled into this and swimming in all of this wisdom and that you've talked about tonight and that's in the book is really literally took me from being Dr. Doom with my outlook on the world, not just with the climate, but the political crisis in this country, which is ongoing, the economy, it's, pick a crisis, to it just only started to make sense to focus on things like kinship and moral obligations and sacred obligations and all of these things that I learned listening to you and all of the other people in the book. And again, that's where it comes down to this book. The wisdom in it is almost like a user's manual. It's functional and it works, just like we were talking about, just like you were talking about, as evidenced by you're still here and we're all still here. And one it's a beautiful quote. We got to interview the Honorable Ron Good of the Norfolk Mono, and he and his folks are deeply involved in continuing cultural burns, and he talked a little bit about the beginning of that process. And I just would like to read, it seems like a fitting time to kind of read this beautiful passage. He said, "The first thing we do is our ceremonial blessing ceremony for our work. We want to connect to the land, want to connect to the spirits of the land. We want them to know why we're here. They don't care who I am or what my name is. They don't care where I came from. They want to know why I'm here and what I plan to do. Just because you're Indian, that doesn't mean you know what the hell you're doing. So we get questioned by the spirits. Then you sing a good song. Sometimes you just sing the song and then you don't go anywhere. It doesn't travel. It's dead. It's dead because either everything's absorbing it or they're just letting you sing by yourself. You sing 2 or 3 verses and pretty soon here comes butterfly. Here comes dragonfly. Spider comes out of his hole to start listening. Birds come by your 3rd verse. They're chirping with you. And now the trees are hearing your voice. By the time you're done, your voice is traveling throughout the forest or over the land because now they're accepting you. Now they're hearing why you're here. They understand. So now you're going to be helped by them. This is being connected."
Yes, what a beautiful story. Affirm life and life affirms you.
Yeah. Well, Melissa, it's been a real honor, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being in the book. It was so powerful getting to do that interview with you live and then get to write it up. And thank you for everything that you shared tonight. So much wisdom, so much medicine, and yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Dahr. Really, what an honor and a privilege to be a part of this book with you and Stan and all the 19 other folks. Yeah, let's keep learning and sharing this work with all of you. So thank you for this opportunity and all you share with your other works as well.
Well, thank you, Melissa. And thanks everybody for joining us, and good night.
Good night.